The janitor at the $1 million auction. The gavel was already rising when the man in the rubber gloves spoke. "If you buy it," Malcolm Hayes said from the back of the room, "the FBI will take it back by morning." $18 million hung in the air of the bellwether auction house, suspended between the auctioneer's raised hand and the paddle of a woman in the third row who had just outbid a museum. Every head turned. 200 of the wealthiest people in the city, in a room designed to make them feel like the only people in the world, turned to look at the janitor who had ruined the most important sale of the season. And the janitor looked back at them without flinching, a mop bucket beside him and yellow rubber gloves on his hands. The auction director's voice cut through the murmur. "Security, remove him." A collector near the aisle laughed the easy laugh of a man who has never once been asked to leave anywhere. "The custodian has thoughts on Dutch masters," he said to the room. "Tell us, friend, what does the man who cleans the floor know about a painting worth more than his life?" Malcolm did not raise his voice. He never raised his voice. He had learned 12 years ago exactly what it cost a man like him to raise his voice in a room like this. "I know it has 3 layers of overpaint where the record says 1, he said. "I know it's been relined 5 times, and the last relining used a wax that wasn't manufactured until after the artist was dead. And I know there's a thumbprint under the left edge of the frame in the ground layer that isn't in any published photograph of this work, because I'm the only person in this room who has ever looked at the edge of a painting instead of the front of it. Details no one had published. Details no one could have if they hadn't handled the thing with their own hands." The room went from amused to uncertain in the space of a breath, and the woman in the third row slowly lowered her paddle. "That's quite a speech," the auction director said, recovering for a man holding a mop. A ripple of nervous laughter. "Do you have documentation credentials? Anything at all beyond the theater?" "I had credentials," Malcolm said. 12 years ago. You may remember the name. A lot of the people in this room built their collections on the market I got pushed out of." He let that land because a few faces in the front rows had gone still, the faces of people who did indeed remember, who had perhaps profited. "I don't need you to believe me. I need you to put that painting on a scale before you spend $18 million on it. That's all. One scale. If I'm wrong, arrest me." For one long moment the room teetered, and Malcolm could feel it the way you feel a canvas about to give under a bad cleaning. The woman in the third row had lowered her paddle. The auctioneer looked to the director. The director looked to a man in the wings, the beautiful specialist in the perfect suit, who gave the smallest shake of his head. And then the lights went out. Now before the dark, before the second theft, before you learn which of the 4 people you are about to meet actually did this, subscribe, because this story will make you change your mind about who the criminal is 3 separate times, and the last time is the one that matters. And hold on to one question while you watch, because the whole thing turns on it. If you stay silent while someone tells a lie, do you become part of the lie? Let's go back 3 days, before the gavel, before the dark. Malcolm Hayes cleaned the bellwether auction house at night. And at night the bellwether was the most beautiful place he knew. During the day it belonged to the buyers and the specialists and the smooth young people in good suits who walked past him as though he were part of the architecture. But after midnight, when the last of them had gone, the great galleries were his, and he moved through them with his cart and his cloths, and he looked at the art, the way he had once been paid handsomely to look at it before the accusation, before the ruin, before the rubber gloves. He had been a restorer once, one of the best in the country. He could read a canvas the way a physician reads a body, could tell you where it had been wounded, and where it had been healed, and where someone had lied about the healing. He noticed things he was not supposed to notice, and he had learned in the 12 years since his career had been taken from him to keep noticing them and to say nothing, because the last time he had said something out loud, it had cost him everything. That was the wound at the center of Malcolm Hayes, and it was more complicated than the world knew. 12 years ago, he had signed a document authenticating a painting he had doubts about. Hai had signed it under pressure to protect a younger colleague who would otherwise have taken the blame, and when the painting was later exposed as compromised, it was Malcolm's signature on the paper, Malcolm's name in the record, Malcolm's license that was revoked. He had never confessed the whole truth. He had let the world believe he was either a fraud or a fool, because the truth that he had stayed silent to protect someone felt like a kind of nobility he could live inside. But silence in the face of a lie is not the same as innocence, and Malcolm knew it, and it was the thing he could least stand to look at. He always noted things in pencil. Ink can react, can bleed, can bloom under solvent. Pencil is honest and reversible. He looked at the edge of a canvas before he looked at its face, because the face is where the forger spends his effort, and the edge is where he gets careless. He smelled varnish. These were the habits of a life he was no longer allowed to live, and he could not put them down. 3 nights before the auction, cleaning the restoration room, Malcolm found a drop of paint on the floor that should not have existed. It was a particular blue, a modern synthetic ultramarine, bright and cheap and chemically wrong, sitting on the tile beneath a workbench where the season's headline lot, a supposed 17th century masterwork, had been examined that afternoon. That painting's palette, according to every published analysis, contained only period mineral pigments. There was no blue like that anywhere in it. And yet here was a drop of it on the floor, fresh, still faintly tacky at the center. He crouched and looked at it for a long time. He did not touch it. He took a pencil from his cart, and on the back of a supply receipt, he sketched the shape of the drop and noted the tile it sat on and the time. Then he stood and looked up at the empty easel where the painting had rested that afternoon, and he did the arithmetic of it in his head. A drop of modern synthetic ultramarine did not fall from a 17th century painting. It fell from a brush. It fell from someone working on a canvas in this room recently with a paint that belonged to no old master, and the only canvas that had been in this room that day was a work insured for $15 million. There were 3 innocent explanations, and he considered all of them, because a man who has been destroyed by a false accusation does not throw accusations lightly. A conservator might have been retouching a wholly different piece. A studio assistant might have been careless with a color chart. A cleaner before him might have tracked it in. But the drop was fresh, and it was directly beneath the headline, Lot's Workstation, and it was a color that had no business anywhere near old mineral pigments, and Malcolm had spent his whole life learning not to explain away the thing his eyes were telling him. He had explained things away once. It had cost him a career. He photographed the drop with the small disposable camera he kept in his cart, the kind you buy at a drugstore, because he did not trust the building's cameras, and he did not entirely trust his own phone. Then he wet a cloth and cleaned the floor, because that was his job, and because a drop of paint that vanishes overnight is a drop of paint that someone will assume was never noticed. The next morning, the head specialist made sure to establish the order of the world. Julian Voss was a beautiful man in the way expensive things are beautiful, all surface and confidence, and he had built a career on never being the one whose fingerprints were on anything. I walked a client past Malcolm in the corridor, and rather than acknowledge the man cleaning near a $15 million canvas, Julian gestured at the wastebasket and said pleasantly, "That one's overflowing when you get a chance. Not the painting, the trash." He made sure the client saw where Malcolm belonged in the order of things, and the client smiled, and Malcolm emptied the basket and said nothing, and remembered. He went to Celeste Ward with what he'd seen. Celeste was young, sharp, and drowning. She had inherited the bellwether from her father. Along with its debts, and the coming auction was the thing that would either save the house or end it. She listened to Malcolm describe 3 observations: the modern blue on the floor, the wax in the relining, the overpaint. And he watched her want to believe him and fail to. "You want me to halt the sale of the season," she said, "over a drop of paint you say you saw on a floor. Do you have any idea what you're asking?" She told him to file a formal report, but the bellwether's internal system did not permit a custodial account to submit a specialist assessment. There was quite literally no field in the software for what he knew. The building was designed so that his expertise could not be entered into the record. With respect, Malcolm had said, standing in her office with his cart parked in the hall, "I'm not asking you to halt anything. I'm asking you to have someone with a license pull a cross-section, a paint sample, the width of a hair. If I'm wrong, you've lost an afternoon, and I've embarrassed myself, and you can fire me for wasting your time. If I'm right, you've saved the house from selling a fraud and getting sued by the buyer and the state at the same time." Celeste had rubbed her eyes. She was younger than the weight she was carrying. "Do you know what my father used to say about the people who clean this building?" she asked, and Malcolm braced for the usual thing, and instead she surprised him. "He said they see everything and get asked nothing. He didn't mean it as a compliment to them. He meant it as a warning to me." For a moment he thought she would listen. Then the phone on her desk lit up with the name of an investor, and the moment closed. "File it through the system," she said. "I can't act on a hallway conversation, you know that." But the system would not take it. When Malcolm tried that night to enter his observations into the internal condition report platform, the software informed him that his account type, custodial, did not have permission to submit a specialist assessment. There was no field for what he knew. The building itself had been built to make his knowledge inadmissible. That was the first suspect, if you were keeping track. Celeste Ward, young and desperate, with everything to lose if the sale collapsed, and everything to gain if it didn't. She had motive written all over her. Down in the storage vault, Malcolm noticed the second thing. He had gone down to change the filters on the air handling a legitimate errand, and while he was there, he did what he could not stop himself from doing, which was to look. The frame of the headline painting had fresh nail holes along the inner edge, bright wounds in old wood, the kind you make when you take a canvas out of its frame and put it back. Old frames have old holes darkened, oxidized, the wood healed around them. These were pale and clean. Somebody had unstretched this canvas and restretched it recently, and there was only one reason to do that to a painting 3 days before it sold for $18 million. Standing beside him, cataloging, was Rosa Bell, the vault's photographer, a woman Malcolm had known in his old life, a woman he had in fact protected all those years ago at the cost of his own name. He had not known she worked here. Seeing her had been like seeing a page from a book he had closed. "Rosa," he said quietly. "Don't," she said, not looking up from her clipboard. "Whatever you're about to see, Malcolm, don't see it out loud. Not here." She logged the frame and moved on quickly. Too quickly, her pen pressing hard enough to tear the form, and Malcolm felt the first cold thread of a suspicion he did not want to have. Because if he could not trust Rosa, then the one clean thing in his whole ruined history, the sacrifice he had made for her, would turn out to have been made for nothing. He watched her go, and he did not know in that moment whether she was warning him or warning him off. The next day, a bottle of solvent appeared in Malcolm's supply locker, a restorer's solvent, aggressive, capable of stripping a varnish layer in seconds. He had not put it there, and within the hour, Julian Voss had reported to Celeste that the custodian, a disgraced former restorer with a documented grievance against the art establishment, had been found in possession of materials that could destroy a painting, and that he had been seen entering the vault. There was security footage. It showed a figure in janitor's clothes entering the vault at a time Malcolm had not been there. Malcolm looked at the footage when they confronted him, and he saw the trap in it, and he saw the flaw in the trap in the same instant. The camera angle caught the man from the waist up. It did not show his shoes. "That footage is spliced," Malcolm said. "Look at the floor. The floor's got a matte finish in that clip. I waxed that vault floor yesterday afternoon. It should be reflecting the overheads. That's footage from before the wax cut in over yesterday's timestamp. Nobody in the room knew enough about the floor to argue with him, and nobody in the room cared, because the point had never been to be right. The point had been to remove him before the auction. "You waxed the floor," Julian repeated with a small, pitying smile, as if Malcolm had offered a magic spell as an alibi. "Gentlemen, the man is describing the shine of a floor. This is what happens when you let bitterness curdle into obsession." He turned to Celeste, who stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, unreadable. "He has a documented grievance against this industry. He was found with a stripping solvent one day before our most important sale. I am not comfortable with him in this building." He said it gently, reasonably, the way he said everything. And that was the genius of Julian Voss. He never accused. He only expressed concern and let other people carry out the sentence. Celeste looked at Malcolm for a long moment. He thought for a second that she might ask about the floor. She didn't. She was young, and the sale was in 18 hours, and the debts were real. "I'm sorry," she said, and she meant it, and it didn't matter that she meant it. They fired him that night and walked him out the service entrance into the rain. He should have gone home. Instead, an envelope was waiting in his mailbox, no return address, containing a single item and a ticket. The item was a small fragment of raw canvas, unpainted, aged, the kind cut from the tacking edge of an old picture. The ticket was an admission to the auction. Someone wanted him in that room. Malcolm stood in the rain in his kitchen doorway and understood that walking back into the bellwether would probably get him arrested, and he decided to walk back in anyway, because a man who has spent 12 years staying silent reaches eventually the end of what silence can buy him. Which brings us back to the gavel and the dock. The lights did not go out because of Malcolm. He was standing at the back with security already moving toward him when the room went black, and in the darkness he heard something he understood better than anyone. Present, the specific soft rumble of a padded transport, dolly rolling across a gallery floor moving toward the freight elevator. Someone was using the blackout. Someone had planned the blackout. When the emergency lighting flickered up 30 seconds later, the headline painting still hung on its easel at the front of the room, apparently untouched, and the auction director was already smoothing things over, blaming the storm, calling for calm. But Malcolm had gotten close in the dark, close enough to catch the smell. The varnish coming off the painting on the easel was wrong too, fresh, too sweet, a modern synthetic drying agent, and when a security guard shoved him back, he brushed the frame with his gloved hand and felt the weight of it swing, and the weight was wrong too. Lighter than old oak and old canvas should be. The painting on the easel was not the painting that had been on the easel 90 seconds earlier. They had switched it in the dark. Not the first switch either. The nail holes in the vault had told him days ago that the real painting had already been swapped once quietly before it ever reached the block. What hung at the front of the room now was a copy of a copy, and the genuine article was rolling toward a freight elevator on a padded dolly, while 200 billionaires blinked in the emergency lights. He tried to tell the auction director. Of course he did. In the confusion of the emergency lights, he pushed toward the front and said the painting had been switched, that it needed to be pulled and examined before anyone touched it again, and the director looked at the janitor, who had already interrupted the sale once, and gave a small nod to security, and 2 guards took Malcolm by the arms. "Weigh it," Malcolm said loudly as they pulled him back. "That's all I'm asking. Put it on a scale. Old oak and old canvas have a weight. That thing is light. Weigh it and I'll walk out of here myself." Nobody weighed it. The point had never been the painting. The point had been to get the season's sale to the gavel, and a janitor's certainty was an obstacle, not evidence. Then the woman from the 3rd row found him. Helena Ross, the collector who had almost bought it, who turned out not to be a collector at all. She took him by the elbow, firmly, professionally, and steered him into a side gallery, and she showed him a credential. He had not expected she was working for an insurance consortium, running a recovery operation, and she had come to the bellwether to catch a thief. But she did not believe Malcolm, and she was not interested in his innocence. Her target, she told him plainly, was Celeste Ward. She wanted the canvas fragment in his pocket, and she wanted his testimony against Celeste. and she was willing to make his own legal troubles disappear in exchange. So now the story turned a second time. Not Celeste. Helena Ross, the false buyer, whose real employer cared about recovering money, and nothing else, who would happily let an innocent person hang, if it closed the file faster. Malcolm looked at her and recognized the type. He had been ruined by the type, and he refused to hand her Celeste. Instead, he proved Celeste innocent, which cost him something, because it meant giving up his own best chance at safety. He asked Helena to show him the emails that supposedly proved Celeste had orchestrated the fraud, and he read the timestamps, and he pointed out that they had been generated in a time zone 6 hours off, at an hour when Celeste was demonstrably in the building, but which matched exactly the itinerary of Julian Voss, who had been at a conference abroad that week. The emails weren't Celeste's, they were Julian's, dressed in Celeste's name. Celeste Ward had been framed by the same man in the same style as Malcolm himself, and that was when Julian Voss played the card he had been holding for 12 years. He produced for the auction house's board and for Helena's investigators, and eventually for the press, gathered outside a document from the old scandal, an authentication signed by Malcolm Hayes on a painting later proven compromised. "This man," Julian said smoothly, "is not a whistleblower. He is a forger's accomplice, with a signature to prove it. He has done this before. He is doing it again." Malcolm could have denied it. The signature was real. Denial would have been a lie, and lies were what he was there to end. So he did the hardest thing, which was to tell the truth in public on the worst possible stage. He stood in front of the cameras and the board, and he said, "Yes, that is my signature. I signed it. I signed it under pressure to protect a colleague who would otherwise have been destroyed, and I stayed silent for 12 years. And my silence is the reason the first fraud was never caught, and the reason we are all standing here now." He did not claim innocence. He claimed responsibility, which is a different and heavier thing, and in claiming it, he took back the one thing they had stolen from him, along with his license, which was the right to tell his own story. "You want to know what I am," he said to the cameras, to the board, to the beautiful man standing off to the side, who had built a career on other people's signatures. "I'll tell you what I am. I'm a man who saw something wrong 12 years ago and made himself small about it, because being small was safe. And I have spent every day since paying for the size of that silence. So no, I'm not going to be small tonight. You can print the signature, print all of it. Print the part where I tell you exactly who put a brush to a canvas that wasn't his to touch, and print his name next to mine, because for the first time in 12 years, I am not the only name on the page." He looked at Julian when he said it. Julian's smile did not move, but something behind it did. It was not the speech of a man saving himself. It was the speech of a man who had finally stopped trying to. The colleague he had protected was Rosa Bell. And Rosa, watching him confess the thing he had carried for both of them, finally came to him with what she had kept the infrared photographs of the headline painting shot during cataloging that showed a shipping company's logo stenciled faintly beneath the lining canvas. A logo that connected the painting to a network of movers who specialized in laundering looted art through legitimate auctions. But she made him pay for it first. "You decided for me," she said, her voice shaking. 12 years ago, you decided I couldn't handle the truth, so you carried it and you let them bury me along with it. Don't ever do that again. Not to me, not to anyone." He said he was sorry, and he meant it more than he had ever meant anything. "I thought carrying it for you was the kind thing," he told her. "I've had a long time to understand. It was the cowardly thing, wearing a kind man's coat. I didn't want to watch you go through what I went through. But that was mine to offer, and yours to refuse, and I never gave you the chance to refuse it. I'm sorry, Rosa, not for the 12 years, for the one decision I made without you." Only then did she give him the photographs, and when she did, her hands were steady for the first time since he had seen her in the vault. Celeste came with him to trace it. This was the turn where she stopped being a suspect and became something harder and better. An ally who had something to lose. They worked through the night in the vault records, and Malcolm taught her to read the things he read, the pin marks along a stretcher that record every time a canvas has been remounted, the shipping codes stamped on the backs of crates, the fine wood dust that collects where a frame has been recently worked, the infrared plates that see beneath the paint to the ghosts underneath. She was a quick study. She had grown up in this building and never once been shown its bones. "My father sold things," she said at one point quietly, holding an infrared plate up to the light. "He sold a lot of things, and he never asked where they came from, because asking was bad for business, and I inherited a house built on not asking." She set the plate down. "If I halt everything with a bad provenance, I lose the house. You understand that. The debts come due, and there's nothing left." "I understand it," Malcolm said. "Then tell me why I should do it." "Because the alternative," he said, "is that you become the kind of person who sees the drop of paint on the floor and cleans it up and says nothing. I did that. Once. I've had 12 years to find out what it costs." He didn't look at her. "It costs more than the house." The infrared logo led them to a transport depot on the edge of the city where the genuine painting sat in a climate crate under a different frame waiting to be shipped out of the country. Malcolm knew it was the real one the moment he saw the frame, because along the inner rail was a repair he himself had made years before, in his old life, a tiny reinforcement of the corner joint that no forger would know to copy because no forger had ever seen it. His own past work, the career they had taken from him, was the thing that identified the truth. And there at the depot the story turned the third and final time. Helena Ross arrived with her people to seize everything, and in the seizing a document slipped that shouldn't have. Her insurance consortium had years earlier quietly sold one of the very paintings now in the network, laundering a looted work through a legitimate claim. Helena was not clean. Helena was compromised, a part of the machine she claimed to be dismantling. And Julian Voss was not the mastermind, but the operator, the man who handled the pieces so that people like Helena never had to. Julian arrived at the depot in the confident, unhurried way of a man who has never once been caught dressed, not as a thief but as a conservator overseeing an urgent restoration transfer, with paperwork and a story about smoke damage and a schedule that required the crate to move tonight right now before the humidity did any more harm. It was a good cover. Restoration emergencies move art at odd hours all the time. If Malcolm had not been standing there, it would have worked, and the painting would have crossed a border by morning inside a lie about saving it. "You," Julian said when he saw Malcolm, and for the first time, the perfect surface cracked just slightly. "You do not know when to stop. You never did. That's why they were able to take everything from you the first time. A man who can't stop looking makes himself very easy to ruin." "You'd know," Malcolm said. "You did it once already." Julian tried to move the crate out before they could stop him. He did not use force. This was a battle of knowledge, not violence. Malcolm got to the depot's environmental controls first and locked the humidity down, dropping the moisture in the shipping bay until the air went dry enough that the varnish on the genuine painting would begin to crack if it stayed sealed in the crate much longer. Julian, who understood exactly what dry air does to old oil, had a choice: leave the painting to ruin or open the crate and expose it. He opened the crate. And as he did, Malcolm, who had been recording since the moment he entered the depot on a device Helena had not thought to check, because who searches a janitor, caught Julian and Helena bargaining with each other over the price of the truth, each trying to sell the other out. "You'll ruin it," Julian said, watching the humidity gauge fall, hearing the faint tick of old varnish beginning to tighten in the crate. "You, of all people, you'll destroy a masterpiece to make a point." "No," Malcolm said. "You'll destroy it. Or you'll open it. Those are your two choices, and I'm the only person here who knows which one saves the painting, and I'm not telling you unless you open the crate in front of these cameras." He nodded toward the depot's own security recorder, the one Julian had disabled, and then toward the small device in his own breast pocket. the one nobody searches a janitor for. You taught me something 12 years ago, Julian. You taught me that the man who handles the evidence controls the story. So I stopped handling paintings and started handling recordings. I've been recording since I walked in that door. Julian opened the crate. He had no choice. The alternative was letting a work worth 18 million crack in the dry air while a camera watched him let it happen. And as he lifted the lid, Helena Ross stepped forward to seize it, and the two of them, thief and investigator, began to bargain in low, fast voices over who would take the fall and who would walk each certain. The other was the one who could be sacrificed, and every word of it went into the device in Malcolm's pocket. He had them both. He turned over the recording, the infrared photographs, the frame repair, and the provenance chain to 3 separate authorities at once, so that no single agency and no single interested party could control the story or bury the parts that were inconvenient. The genuine painting went back to its lawful owners, a family whose grandparents' collection had been looted a lifetime ago and laundered through rooms exactly like the bellwether. Julian Voss was charged. Helena Ross's consortium was opened up like the crate in the dry room. Celeste. Ward Cleared made a choice. Her father never would have. She halted every remaining lot with an unverified provenance, took the loss, and stood in front of her clients to announce that the bellwether would publish the full chain of custody for everything it sold, even the ugly parts, even the parts that cost money. It nearly finished the house. It all too slowly saved it because there turned out to be a market for the one thing no one else was selling, which was the truth. There is a detail worth stopping on, because it was the detail that closed the case in court. When Malcolm made his corner repair years ago in his old life, he had signed it the way he signed all his work, not with ink which reacts, but with a light pencil notation on the inner rail of the stretcher. A date and a set of initials, the private signature of a craftsman on a repair no one would ever see. That pencil mark was still there, under the swapped frame and pencil graphite, can be dated, and its age proved that Malcolm had handled and warned about this exact painting more than a decade before the fraud that ruined him. They had all mocked the pencil. Instead of the pen, the looking at the edge instead of the face was the thing that finally cleared his name. He had been telling the truth in graphite the whole time. Nobody had known how to read it. Malcolm's name was restored. His license, his standing, the public record. And he was offered immediately the thing that would have meant everything to him 12 years ago. A role as the establishment's celebrated expert. The redemption story. The face of the reformed auction house. He turned it down. He had learned what that world did with faces. Instead, he opened a small independent authentication studio, and he staffed it with people. The art world had thrown away the disgraced and the overlooked and the ones who had looked at the edge of the painting instead of the front of it and been punished for what they saw. Rosa Bell came to work there, running the imaging lab, shooting the infrared plates that see what the eye can't. They did not speak much about the past. They didn't need to. The work spoke for them, the way it always had, in the quiet language of people who look at the edges of things. And when a young apprentice asked Malcolm once why he still checked the back of every canvas before the front, he said only that the front is where the painting tells you what it wants you to believe, and the edge is where it tells you the truth, and that this is as true of paintings as it is of people. The last image is a simple one. Malcolm Hayes in his own studio, pulling on a fresh pair of gloves. The same gloves the collector had mocked in the auction room. But this time, he was not putting them on to wipe the footprints of rich men off a marble floor. He was putting them on to touch the truth. They had spent so much money trying to hide and to hold it up to the light and to say out loud in a room where finally someone had to listen exactly what he saw. So here is what I want to leave you with. If you stand in a room and someone tells a lie, a big, expensive, confident lie, and you say nothing, are you innocent or have you just become a quiet part of the lie? Malcolm spent 12 years learning the answer the hard way. I'd rather you learn it from him. If this one got to you, subscribe and tell me in the comments. What's the truth you've been staying quiet about, and what would it cost you to finally say it out loud?